The sound of water. In the early summer of my freshman year at university, I didn't have an air conditioner or even a fan in my room, making every day a living hell. One sweltering night, the phone rang. It was around 1 in the morning. "Who the hell is calling at this hour?" I answered, irritated. On the other end, I heard a bubbling sound like water. It sounded like someone was trying to speak underwater. I thought it might be a crossed line distorting the voice, but the intervals between the sounds were too long to be someone speaking. If I had to put it into words, it would be like this: glub, 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 shh, glub, shh, shh, glub, glub. Normally, I would have been creeped out, but I was so annoyed by the heat that steam was practically coming out of my head. "Shut up! Who the hell is this?" The phone call continued, with the bubbling sounds coming at regular intervals. I stubbornly kept asking, "Who is it? Who is it? Who is it?" But after about 10 minutes with no response, I got fed up and hung up. 3 months later, I had completely forgotten about the incident when I found a message on my answering machine with the same bubbling sound. The entire recording was filled with glub, glub, shh, glub. It was so unsettling that I considered deleting it. But I wanted to get my friend's opinions, so I left it. A few days later, a senior from my club came to visit. I deleted all the messages except for the bubbling one to show him. The senior walked in, apologized, and handed me a can of coffee from a vending machine. He had accidentally bought a hot coffee instead of a cold one. It was still sweltering in September. When I played the message for him, he held the hot coffee tightly, blowing on it as he drank. This senior had an unusually strong sense of the supernatural. He was someone I considered a mentor. He started shaking. "Should I play it again?" "Don't!" he yelled. "Does it sound like water to you?" His face was pale. "What? Do you hear something else?" "It's a vengeful spirit. Listening to it could shorten your lifespan. It's here now. It's neck." I had an idea who it might be. At that time, a woman had been stalking me. Whenever I ignored her, she would threaten to take sleeping pills and die. "Can you see its face? Is it a woman?" "Yes, but it's not just the face, it's the neck. It's stretching from the window." I was horrified. I'd heard that vengeful spirits could extend their necks while the person was asleep, driven by intense love or hatred. "Please do something." The senior, looking like he wanted to bolt, nervously said, "Whatever you do, don't answer that call again. You need to talk to her directly while she's awake." He looked up at the ceiling and his eyes widened. "This isn't just any sleep. If it keeps going, she could die. Look, her neck's about to snap." I couldn't see anything. The senior left despite my attempts to stop him, so I reluctantly went to the stalker's house. The rest of the story deviates from the paranormal and is something I don't want to discuss, but I ended up being stalked by that woman for another 2 years. Honestly, the live commentary of her suicide attempts over the phone was scarier than the bubbling call. The Fishman. I want to write down all these stories before summer ends. I think I've said I wouldn't write anymore, but I want to finish this. I've done some pretty crazy things and visited some dangerous places, but luckily, I've never been possessed, except for once. In the fall of my freshman year at university, I did a Kokuri-san session with some friends from my club. We did it in my dorm room, and it was a serious session. I had a senior in the club who was my mentor in the occult. He taught us to write the Japanese alphabet on a sheet of paper with ink mixed with the participants' saliva. Also, the sake placed near the torii gate was purified by being tied with a rope for 2 days. Usually we'd do it lightheartedly, but with the mentor involved, the atmosphere was different, and everyone became serious. About 10 minutes after we started, a man in white clothes came out of the wall without any warning. He had a pale, expressionless face, but his face was somehow like a fish. I froze, but the others didn't notice. As we continued with the Kokuri-san session, the man stared at us and eventually disappeared back into the wall. Before he vanished, I adjusted my glasses to see better, but his outline didn't blur. I don't know why, but supernatural things can be seen clearly whether you wear glasses or contacts. Despite my pounding heart, we finished the session safely, and everyone left. As he was leaving, I asked my mentor, "What was that?" I knew he must have seen it too, but all he said was, "I don't know." The next day, strange things began to happen in my room. I could tolerate things like rapping sounds, but the scariest part was when I'd casually look back while playing games at night and see the blanket on my bed shaped like a person. When I'd jump at the sight, the blanket would immediately flatten out. Other times, when I'd hear ringing in my ears and look out the window, I'd often see the fish man passing by. Seeing him was one thing, but the blanket moving on its own was mentally exhausting. I became gaunt and begged my mentor for help. He said that the fish man wasn't a human spirit. If it were a human spirit, he could usually tell what it wanted or was thinking, but this one was different. It wasn't a simple animal spirit either. He didn't know what it was and wanted to avoid it at all costs. Hearing this from my trusted mentor left me terrified. I thought maybe another Kalkuri-san session would fix it, but he told me not to. I was tormented by this for about 2 weeks. The fishman, who occasionally appeared, didn't seem resentful, but had a sort of malicious curiosity. The human-shaped blanket was hard to deal with, but even more unnerving was finding the door unlocked in the morning after I'd locked it at night. Once, I woke up in the middle of the night and found myself holding the doorknob. Apparently, I'd been opening it in my sleep. I thought I was going insane and decided to move out. Just then, my mentor showed up unexpectedly and said he'd stay for 3 days. During that time, the fishman didn't appear, and no strange phenomena occurred. When he left, he said, "It probably won't appear anymore." He sighed heavily and looked exhausted. "What's going on?" I asked, and he reluctantly told me. "You know the hidden dosojin at Mount Yi?" It was a well-known haunted spot, considered very dangerous. I nodded. "I destroyed it." I was speechless. Apparently, someone with an even more dangerous spirit attached to them had come, and the fishman vanished. In a half-desperate mood, my mentor decided to solve my problem as well. He didn't tell me why he destroyed it. He just weakly smiled and said, "I'll deal with it somehow." The Spring of the Moon. During the summer break of my sophomore year in college, I tagged along with a friend to his rural hometown. He was my mentor, a senior deeply into the occult. While my mentor seemed to be searching for something eerie, I had nothing to do and felt uncomfortable at his relative's house. So, I spent my days idly wandering the mountain. On the 4th night, there was a full moon. After dinner at the house where we were staying, I left for a walk, avoiding the awkwardness of being there without my mentor, who had disappeared somewhere. I was aimlessly wandering when I suddenly felt a strange sensation and stopped. Although it was a small, dried-up stream that I had passed by several times before, tonight, under the moonlight, I noticed a shimmer of light. Upon closer inspection, I found water bubbling up in the previously dry stream, with the clear reflection of the moon on its surface. Puzzled by the sudden appearance of water, despite the lack of recent rain, I returned to the house and told my mentor about it. He responded, "That's the Spring of the Moon." Apparently, it was a famous spot around here that only filled with water on full moon nights. Curious about why such a phenomenon occurred, my mentor casually explained, "There's a reservoir about 300 meters below this village. The old folks say the location of the springs changed after it was built. The flow of the underground water must have shifted. It felt odd that the spring would only bubble up during full moons." My mentor then explained, "It's tidal force." He elaborated that while the moon's gravitational pull on Earth is minor, it significantly affects liquids, as seen with the tides. On full moon nights, the tidal force is at its peak, which might influence the reservoir, affecting the underground water pressure and causing the spring to flow. Maybe the slight pressure change in the lake affects the underground water flow, causing the spring to react, he said. "Interesting," I replied, genuinely impressed, despite having some doubts. He continued, "But in this village, that spring is known as the Spring of the Moon, and the lore is that drinking its water on a full moon night grants spiritual powers." It was a romantic notion, but the mention of spiritual powers also felt ominous. As expected, my mentor then said, "Let's go." We headed out in the dark with our flashlights dimmed. I feared that being seen sneaking out at this hour would make staying in the village even more uncomfortable. But fortunately, we didn't encounter anyone. Relieved to find the spring still flowing, I had feared it might vanish like a mirage. The full moon shimmered on the water's surface, nestled against the mountainside. My mentor crouched by the edge, his eyes gleaming as he gazed at the moonlit water. I thought about the tidal force explanation he had given me. While not a science enthusiast, I knew that tidal forces were real. However, I vaguely remembered that tidal forces also peaked during the new moon. So why did this spring only bubble up during the full moon? My mentor's eyes seemed to deny his own tidal force explanation. I felt an inexplicable chill. With a splash, my mentor scooped some water from the spring. He intended to drink it. Did he see the full moon in his cupped hand? He began to drink the water fervently, repeatedly dipping his hand. I stood there watching. Eventually, I witnessed something unbelievable and collapsed to the ground. When I came to, my mentor's hand was still, and the water's surface rippled. The moon's reflection had vanished, gone. I tried to rationalize the event, thinking of the tidal force explanation as a comforting thought. As I remained frozen, my mentor nonchalantly walked over and said, "Well, we've drunk the moon. Let's head back." At that moment, I realized something. Looking up at the sky while still sitting, I laughed at how ridiculous it all was. The sky had clouded over, obscuring the moon. It was absurd. If only I hadn't remembered the mystery of the new moon. The next day, my mentor explained nonchalantly. The reservoir conducts test releases every 30 days. The test release cycle coincided with the lunar cycle, known as the synodic month, averaging about 29.53 days. The 30-day test release cycle would cause a 6-day shift over a year, but the schedule was adjusted to avoid holidays, aligning it closer to the lunar cycle. Though it's rare for the spring to bubble up exactly on the full moon, he added. I felt deflated. The cause of the underground water pressure changes wasn't even the tidal force, but the reservoir's test releases. I had been fooled. However, when I finally understood the true meaning of that night's events, my mentor was no longer around. Years later, after my mentor's mysterious disappearance, I remembered that night and realized there was one unsolved mystery. That night, my mentor and I had dimmed our flashlights as we headed to the spring, said to flow only on full moon nights. When had the sky begun to cloud over? What happens when people die? During my university days, I often took walks in a park filled with pigeons. They wandered all over the paved paths, pecking at whatever was on the ground. There was a particular spot near a bench where I often sat, and a flock of pigeons always gathered there, pecking at the ground. I guess someone must be sitting on this bench, throwing their leftover lunch scraps or something. In the spring of my second year, we had a cherry blossom viewing party in that park as part of our club's welcome event for new members. Beautiful cherry blossoms were in full bloom. Our club wasn't anything weird, but we had one senior who was like an occult god, whom I both admired and mocked as my mentor. That mentor, surprisingly drunk, had passed out. Someone holding a beer mused, "I wonder who first said there are bodies buried under the cherry blossoms." My mentor suddenly sat up and slurred, "Not everyone buried under the cherry blossoms is lucky." Other seniors quickly restrained him to prevent him from scaring the freshmen. I was a bit disappointed. "I'll take him to rest," I said, and brought him to the bench where I usually sat, letting him lie down. After a while, I sat beside him with some water. "What were you trying to say back there?" Breathing heavily, my mentor pointed, "Look, the pigeons are there." I glanced over and saw shadows that looked like pigeons moving in the now dark park. The pigeons all raised their heads at once, their eyes reflecting small points of light as they looked at us. "I need to teach you something important." Maybe because he was drunk, my mentor spoke to me in an unusual tone. I couldn't help but tense up. "Or did I tell you before? What do you think happens when a person dies?" "Huh? They go to the afterlife?" My mentor sighed deeply. "They don't go anywhere. They either cease to exist or remain there." I didn't understand. My mentor taught me many things, but he rarely spoke about such philosophical or religious matters. So, they're right beside us. It took me a moment to realize he was talking about ghosts or spirits. Even those being eaten by pigeons remain until they're gone, and then it's over. Huh? I rubbed my eyes but saw nothing. It's a very weak one. It's almost gone. The pigeons don't know what they're eating, but the one being eaten thinks, if I get eaten, I'll disappear. So they disappear. I don't get it. Most birds can normally see human souls, my mentor muttered. Had someone died where the pigeons always gathered? We're only slightly apart. Better to be consumed by cherry blossoms than by pigeons. With a sigh smelling of alcohol, that was all he said before falling silent again. The ruckus continued on the lawn. Have you ever thought about your own death, mentor? It was something I had always wanted to ask, but never had the nerve to. The same thing. I'll become a terrible spirit, remain until I'm gone, and then it's over. It was one step more than I expected, but I let it slide. The decapitated grasshopper. When I was a kid, I once decapitated a grasshopper. Its severed head continued to move its antennae, while the body kept hopping around. Terrified, I threw the head away and ran off. That memory became a kind of trauma for me, and something during my university days reminded me of it. Despite being a scaredy cat, my curiosity often led me to visit haunted spots. I had a senior who introduced me to the occult, whom I called my mentor, both respecting and teasing him. One autumn, during my freshman year, I sneaked into a supposedly haunted abandoned house with my mentor. It was rumored to have been a hospital, and there were stories of hearing footsteps in the empty hallways at night. I thought my mentor would be impressed with such a place, but he just said, "There can't be nobody there. You're there to hear it, right?" It felt like he was nitpicking a philosophical question about falling trees and empty forests, and it annoyed me a bit. But when the clunk, clunk sound started echoing, I felt more thrilled than scared, thinking I had succeeded in impressing him. My mentor had an extraordinary sensitivity to the supernatural. So if a place was rumored to be haunted, it usually was. He could even make things happen where nothing should. Shh. We hid in what seemed to be a multi-bed hospital room, holding our breath. The footsteps approached from the dark hallway with a steady rhythm. "It's a child," he whispered, noting the stride length. It was impressive that he could deduce that from just the sound of the footsteps. The footsteps passed right in front of our hiding spot. Only the sound moved, without any visible figure or presence. It was real. My knees were shaking, but I felt a sense of victory over my usually reluctant mentor, feeling proud. But when I glanced at his face in the faint moonlight, he was pale. "What is that?" My heart nearly stopped. Seeing my mentor scared was a first. I could brave any haunted spot because he was always composed beside me. How bad could it be if even he was terrified? I felt like crying. "Let's get out of here." Without a second thought, we ran. I felt like the footsteps were following us until we escaped the abandoned house, and I felt like I wasn't alive. Finally, outside, we got into my mentor's car. "What was that?" "I don't know." He claimed he only heard the footsteps. Yes, that was what the place was known for, but he insisted, there's no way I couldn't see it. He was adamant that a spirit making such clear sounds couldn't exist just as a sound. I was amazed at how much confidence he had in his own psychic abilities. About half a year later, my mentor brought it up again. "Remember the footsteps in that abandoned hospital?" He seemed excited. "I think I've figured it out." Probably. He had been researching the background of that incident. "I think it was a phantom limb." He explained that a young girl who had lost both legs in an accident had been hospitalized there. She had constantly complained of phantom limb sensations, feeling her lost legs itch. The phantom legs were still wandering the hospital. I was reminded of the decapitated grasshopper. This is a first for me too. The occult is deep. He seemed unusually happy. I was incredulous, but I asked, "What happened to that girl?" He replied in a tone that sounded like a joke, though it was hard to take it as one. "I killed her yesterday.